So here we are at part 2 of the Avatar The Last Airbender Season 1 conversation, and this video is all about the characters. Avatar The Last Airbender characters are some of the most complex, well-rounded, fleshed-out characters you will ever come across. And that's not me exaggerating or letting nostalgia cloud my judgment, it's just the truth. Every character has an arc, experiences conflict, and grows. They build meaningful relationships with each other, relationships that also grow and develop and change. I mentioned in the last episode that Avatar The Last Airbender was not a plot-driven show, and that's because it's a character-driven show. The plot is secondary to the actions and choices of the characters. Character development is more important than reaching whatever point the plot requires us to reach, and nowhere is that more evident than in Season 1. So let's dive in. Long ago, the four nations lived together in harmony. Then, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Only the Avatar, master of all four elements, could stop them. But when the world needed him most, he vanished. 100 years passed and my brother and I discovered a new Avatar, an airbender named Aang. And although his airbending skills are great, he has a lot to learn before he's ready to save anyone. Season 1 introduces us to our main characters, Aang, KATARA, Sokka, Zuko, and IROH. Then we have our second bad guy, who is the real bad guy because Zuko is soon depicted as a sympathetic villain, ZHAO. Then we have side characters that we are going to see again, which are SUKI, the Mechanist, and his son Teo, HARU and his dad TYRO, Master Paku, Jet, Bumi, Bato, and June. These are a lot of characters, and we are going to talk about them all. Obviously, we'll have more to discuss with the main cast, but believe it or not, I have something to say about our 9 side characters as well. So let's look at each character, what they went through, where they started, and where they ended up. Aang wakes up to find that he's been hitting that snooze button for 100 years. As the Avatar, it's his responsibility to keep the balance between the four nations and the spirit world, so his absence has had the unfortunate consequence of allowing the Fire Nation to wreak havoc on the world. There are a lot of theories out there about what would have happened if Aang never ran away. My personal favorite being that he and Monk Gyatso would have gone into hiding somewhere in the Earth Kingdom, with Gyatso trying to train Aang as quickly as possible. Of course, it is also possible that Aang would have just died in the attack, or that the Avatar state would have kicked in and he would have just destroyed the Fire Nation army. We'll never know. As it is, Aang has the task of ending a 100-year war with no training, no guidance, and no help. Aang is the opposite of everything you expect, given his entrance. The way he emerges from the iceberg, eyes and tattoos glowing, you expect a powerful character, maybe even a scary one. And powerful he may be, but he's energetic and playful and sincere, which immediately subverts our expectations. It's also a good contrast to Sokka and Katara's arguing and sarcasm. He's full of life and lacks the aura of the other characters because he hasn't grown up oppressed or felt the pain and suffering caused by war. Like I said in the last video, Aang is the perfect way to introduce us to the world and impress upon us how much it has changed, because he's from a time when letting loose and having fun was the norm. Now everyone is so serious and scared. He doesn't just have to learn the elements, he has to adapt to this new, darker world. Aang wants to explore the Fire Nation ship with Katara because he genuinely doesn't know what kind of dangers there are. He's never seen anything like this, so in his mind, Katara is just afraid of the unknown, which I would agree with him, to be a great bender you have to let go of such fear. But he doesn't know that it's a real fear of very dangerous firebenders and not just fear of a scary ship. He has no way of understanding her fear because he's never seen war. He's also very intelligent and adapts quickly to his situation. When he goes with Zuko, this is only his second time on a Fire Nation ship, and his first time encountering hostile firebenders. In fact, I think it would be safe to say that Aang has never even actually been in a fight before. He was training with the monks, which I'm sure included combat, but he would have never needed to use those skills before now. But he's quick to adapt, assesses the situation, which you can see as he looks around and when he says, "I bet you've never fought an airbender before." He comes up with a plan and executes it confidently. So, how does that change or grow over the season? Well, at first glance, you could say it doesn't. Up until the second last episode, Aang is still playful, still charismatic, still, some might say, immature and childish. But I think his ability to remain this way in the face of all the darkness and the fear and the loss that surrounds him is a great thing. Like KATARA always says, Aang gives everyone hope. I think it's important for him to be a reminder of life and love and fun, because after all, that is what they're fighting for. The important growth for him is the full acceptance of the Avatar mantle and his dedication to fulfilling that role. Aang started the series running away from his responsibility, but by the end he stands in it, embracing it proudly. This is all thanks to the brilliant episode 12, The Storm, where he's forced to confront his past and truth about why he disappeared. It's important, because knowing this story gives us some insight into Aang's character. When I was talking about this episode in the last video, I said that the traits that define Aang are incompatible with being the Avatar. Everything about him and how he was raised makes it that much harder for him to be the Avatar. He's a kill him with kindness kind of guy, taught to avoid conflict and use as little force as possible to overcome an opponent. Bumi says this when he's fighting Aang, calling them typical airbender tactics, which is Aang's entire problem. He just wants to be a typical airbender, just a simple monk. The storm gives Aang the opportunity, his first opportunity, to be upset about being the Avatar, to be upset with the monks for how they were going to take away everyone and everything he loved, and to properly feel his guilt over running away. I think up until the moment the fisherman calls him out, Aang's been refusing to really think about the part he played in the war. But the more he saw how bad things were and how much people were suffering at the hands of the Fire Nation, the more he starts to feel like it was his fault. I personally like to think that Jet played a big part in this. Aang having to see how the pain of Jet's past and his anger at the Fire Nation had corrupted him, someone so young and someone Aang considered a friend, really hit him hard. So, 2 episodes later, he starts having nightmares fueled by his guilt. He works through his emotions nicely during this episode, moving from anger to shame and finally acceptance. By the end, when he decides to stop thinking about the past and make the most of being here now, it feels like he's gone on a whole emotional journey and come out on the other side. His change is then depicted beautifully in the scene where they're all submerged by the giant wave, exactly like he was 100 years ago. He goes into the Avatar state, but instead of curling into a ball and hiding, he takes control, takes the reins, and gets them out. He's not hiding anymore. He's not afraid. In the end, he gets a little bit of closure, I think. He says it himself. He wasn't there when the Fire Nation attacked his people, so he's going to make a difference at the Northern Water Tribe. And he does. And I think being able to do that was kind of like coming full circle on his character. There are a lot of moments I could choose from, since Aang is a pretty fun and likable character. And I thought about picking one of those, like in the Fortune Teller episode where he's in a love triangle and doesn't even know it. But I decided to go with something a bit more obscure. At the end of The Blue Spirit, when he saves Zuko from being captured and then sits and talks with him while he's still passed out, wondering if they would be friends if there was no war, I find it such a touching moment. Saving Zuko is one thing. You could say he was just evening the score since Zuko saved him first. But he didn't have to sit there afterwards. I think in this moment, Aang sees Zuko differently for the first time. The way we changed our perception of Zuko after the storm, this is that moment for Aang. But he doesn't know the behind the scenes. He doesn't know why Zuko saved him, which is why he doesn't immediately go back to Sokka and KATARA. I think a part of him genuinely thought he might be able to talk to Zuko, which is why he's so sad when he gets back to Sokka and KATARA. Sokka asks him if he made a new friend, and he says, "No, I don't think I did." He's actually sad about that, and I love that about Aang. He's pure and an eternal optimist, and this scene depicts that amazingly, so that's why I chose it. I also want to say that I believe that in this moment, Aang really thought that Zuko might be an ally, or like there was something good in Zuko, like he saved him for a good thing and not selfish reasons, because in book 3, in Fire, when Zuko comes back and he's all like, "I'm changed now, I want to be your teacher," and everybody doesn't believe him, Aang is kind of like, well, he did save me when I was captured by ZHAO, and then KATARA is the one who is like, Sokka is like, he only did that because he wanted to capture you himself, and Aang is like, yeah, you're probably right, But I've always taken that to mean like he never thought about that. Like he didn't think that was the reason. He never thought that could be the reason. He just thought Zuko saved him because he saved him because he needed saving. Which is why I think in this moment, like he's sitting there genuinely like, I think both of us are just fighting each other because we have to, because it's a war, but like if there was no war, we might be friends. So yeah, that's why I like this scene for Aang. I'm not sure why Aang is such a liar. Frankly, his morals are really interesting to me because he doesn't seem to really care when Katara steals from the pirates either. Maybe it's because he's 12 years old. I don't know. Whatever the reason, I'm not a fan of it. It's not a big deal, and it's not like he's a pathological liar, but the 2 times he does it, I really, really dislike it. First, in The Great Divide, it's just wrong. He lies about people's entire history, trivializing it just because he's irritated by their fighting. And the second time, in Battle of the Water Tribe, it's just sad. The betrayal that Sokka and Katara feel is completely justified, and it hurts because they weren't actually going to leave him. He just didn't trust them enough to even have a conversation with them. Actually, I've always wondered why he assumed that it was either him or their dad. Like, why couldn't they all go? They could fly on Appa, since it would be quicker, see their dad, and then head on to the North Pole. I don't know. Anyway, this episode makes me feel so bad for everyone involved. The first thing we see Katara do is bend, and then a few seconds later we see her doing even more powerful bending. Considering each character's introduction basically sums up their character, Aang is playful and energetic, Sokka is sarcastic and sexist, a character flaw that is addressed, and sees himself as the leader. IROH loves Pai Sho, and Zuko is moody and determined. So, given Katara's introduction, I feel like it's safe to say that this season is largely about her bending. Most of her development will be about her bending. Then she tells us that she's the one that basically takes care of Sokka. She's the mother figure, the responsible one. And then we see that she's hot-tempered. We also see that she's always going to help people in need, often at great personal risk and against Sokka's judgment. By the end of season 1, all of these traits have simply been reinforced. We get a bit more depth to her, so we see she's ambitious, and that ambition can sometimes cloud her judgment, like with the waterbending scroll and how it makes her mean and cruel to Aang. We see her slow progression as a bender, from novice to intermediary, before finally learning from Master Paku and proving how powerful she is. We also learn that she does not take betrayal lightly, nor does she accept disrespect or bruises to her ego. Case in point, Jet and Master Paku. Besides Appa and Momo, though, I think Katara's character has the least development this season. She has a few learning moments here and there, but it's nothing profound, nothing too deep, and she's not given any real flaws. The ambition, which got them in trouble with the pirates and almost got Aang captured, isn't really depicted as a flaw or something she needs to work on. It's more of, I don't know what came over me, I'm so sorry. And it's resolved very quickly and never brought up again. Not that all characters necessarily need a flaw, but having something like, say, Aang's tendency to be childish or Sokka's sexism makes them more interesting and gives their characters somewhere to go. Since Katara doesn't really have one, the only thing really left to develop is her waterbending. She does get more development in later seasons, but for season 1, yeah, it's not a lot. And I think that's okay. She starts off the season wanting nothing more than to be a waterbender, and ends the season on her way to being a master. That's growth. That was enough for season 1. I think trying to force anything more meaningful onto her would have felt, well, forced. I feel like it's always nice to see the responsible character letting loose a little. I like how Katara acts in Jet, because it's not just about her having a crush, which in itself is also fun. It's her acting like a kid. She's only 14 after all, and having to always take care of Sokka and now Aang must be tiring. I like to think that she liked Jet because he took that responsibility from her. He was a man in charge. He could protect her, and for a while she could just swoon. Which is why his betrayal hurt so badly. For a moment, she'd seen what it felt like to let someone else worry, let someone else take care of everything, and she got to sit back and make a hat. And then it blew up in her face. I love pissed off Katara. Like, I love her a lot. So watching her take out her anger and pain on Jet is great for me. This is how you know that they don't spend much time delving into Katara's character in season 1, because I can't really say she did anything that particularly rubbed me the wrong way. Like, yeah, she steals a scroll, but I don't really care about that. And then she gets jealous of Aang and yells at him, but like, I kind of get that too. Like, seriously, being told by a complete joker how to do something that you have to work so hard to do, with him making it seem so easy, it's annoying. So, if I had to pick something, like if I had to pick something, I would say, I don't know, I really dislike how the show makes her act whenever the focus is on Aang having a crush on her. Because for the rest of the time, she acts perfectly normal to him. But when the plot is about him liking her, suddenly she ignores him and walks away when he's talking, or goes out of her way to call him a friend, saying stuff like, Aang's a sweet little guy, like Momo. Like, why would she say that? Who compares their friends to their pets? Yeah, that's what I choose as my worst Katara moments, because they're obviously for plot purposes only. I don't think that's the natural way her character acts. Sokka grows a lot, I think. He starts off very dismissive of bending, very sexist, arrogant, and distrustful of strangers. Like Katara said in the pilot, he'd been playing soldier for a long time, and it had gone to his head. But he gets humbled quickly, first by the Kyoshi warriors, then by Jet and the freedom fighters. And slowly, as he gains real experience, he uses it to grow as both a soldier and a leader, until by the end, he's not playing anymore. Episodes like The Warriors of Kyoshi show us some of Sokka's more admirable traits. He's not afraid to admit when he's wrong and ask for help. He's not too proud to go to girls who kicked his butt after implying he was better than them simply because they're girls and ask them to teach him. He can recognize where he is lacking, and if someone has something to offer to better himself, he's willing to let them. Episodes like Jet show us that while Sokka may not be as experienced as Jet or as cool and charismatic, he is a good leader. He proves himself as not only a capable warrior, but a smart soldier with a good moral compass, and therefore proves himself as a better leader. He lost his mother, so he knows the pain the Fire Nation causes, but he has his head on his shoulders right, and his instincts are good. Jet tells him, remember why you fight, and I think that's very profound. Jet himself doesn't remember why he fights. He's fighting out of anger, fighting for revenge, which is not the right reason. I think Sokka needed to hear that, and from Jet specifically, because like I said, he can often be arrogant in his abilities and his role as a leader. It's easy to fight because you want respect, because you want to be the best soldier, because he wants to prove that he's good or better than everyone else. But when Jet tells him this, he internalizes it, which I think is why he decides to follow Jet and then go warn the village. He's not doing it to prove he's better than Jet or that he'd been right about Jet being untrustworthy anymore. Now he's doing it for the village, to protect the innocent, because that's why he fights. He's not a leader yet, and still has a lot to learn because he's been relatively sheltered from the war and the rest of the world, but this episode shows us his potential. It's a nice deviation from the comedic character he usually serves as. Just like Jealous Katara, this episode gives Sokka depth. I also have to mention Bato of the Water Tribe, because I don't think that story gets the attention it deserves. We know they lost their mother, and the intro of episode 1 tells us that their father has been off fighting in the war, but they never talk about it. When they leave the South Pole, they don't talk about how they hope they'll run into their dad. Katara always talks about losing her mother, but Sokka doesn't. So having an entire episode on the loss that Sokka does feel is actually quite sad. Just like Katara suffers from having no one to teach her waterbending, Sokka grew up without a male role model. No one to train him as a warrior, no one to show him how to be a man. So of course he's misguided. Of course he's sexist and arrogant. He was the oldest man in the entire village. Bato of the Water Tribe reminds us that Sokka is also just a kid, learning on the go, just like Katara and Aang. And in the end, when he makes the decision to go back to Aang, rather than going to find his father, similar to his actions in Jet, we're shown how much he's really growing into a real leader, into a man. By the end of this season, Sokka is no longer pretending to be a soldier. They don't take any time to show us, but while Katara and Aang are learning waterbending, Sokka is in warrior training. I wish they'd shown us this, because, like Katara's bending, him being a skilled warrior was a big part of his character. It's a shame we don't get that full circle for him, where we get to see him fight some firebenders to contrast his fight with Zuko in the pilot. But like I said, the finale was just a bit rushed. There was also an interesting connection between Yue's death and his mother's. They never address it, but Sokka lost his mother in an attack exactly like the one that at the North Pole. It's how he knows what the black snow is. So it's always interesting to me and very sad that the last time he was so young when the Fire Nation attacked and he couldn't protect his mother. And now, even though he's older and trained as a soldier and probably could have protected Yue from a firebender, he still lost someone he loved. He still couldn't save her. And the consequences of this spill over into season 2. So I have two options for my favorite character moment for Sokka. The first one is anything that happens in the fortune teller. Like, that is my favorite type of Sokka. Like, the foolishness, the anger that he feels, the way he keeps losing his temper with everyone. He's trying to reason with everyone and they're just not getting it. I find it so funny. I think it's the episode I laughed the most, and I probably talked about this when I was talking about the fortune teller in the last episode, so I'm not going to go too much into it. Basically, anything that happens in the fortune teller related to Sokka cracks me up all the time, and so I would say that whole episode would be my favorite character moment for him. But if I was to choose a more serious answer, something that was actually like a serious moment for his character, I would probably pick when he goes back to ask Suki to teach him, because it marks a really, really big shift in his character and his mindset. Like, up until, it's only been 3 episodes, but up until then he's been really like open about, like vocal about how he sees women, you know, and it's like the first thing we hear in the pilot episode from him. It's him like talking down to KATARA, and he's always, you know, saying about how women this and women should do that and men are better at this, and you know, and it's what kicks off this episode, the words of Kiyoshi, because again he's being misogynistic, and then he just gets beat down by Suki, and anyone else would like be licking their wounds and like avoid Suki and the embarrassment of it all, you know, but he doesn't. He just goes back and he even gets down on his knees and he's like completely humble, and he's like, I'd be honored if you could teach me, you know. And I feel like that's a really big thing, because again, we've talked about how he had his dad for a while, but in these crucial years, his teenage years, he hasn't had a man to model himself after, and a man to actually show him what it looks like to be a man. And now he's just living up to it, like just being himself. And I think that's one of the things that I love about Sokka. Like, he gets beat down, but he's always coming back, ready to learn, humble. He does the same thing in season 3. He's a really honorable man, and I think this is like the first time we see that. And so yeah, I would pick that as a more serious answer to my favorite character moments. Demanding, hot-tempered, and entitled. Zuko's story comes full circle, literally. In the first episode, IROH tells him he needs to rest, trying to convince him that he won't be able to find the Avatar. In the last episode, IROH asks why he isn't trying to capture the Avatar. Zuko is the one to say he's tired, and when IROH suggests he rest, Zuko does. He gets a lot of development, arguably the most development this season. We get a lot of insight into his motivations. He's not just bad because Fire Nation bad, he's inherently evil. He's a kid crumbling under his nation's expectations. ZHAO is a bully. He becomes a representation of the Fire Nation in our eyes, so Zuko moves into this ambiguous space where we know he's trying to capture Aang, so he's not a good guy, but we know why he's doing it, so we root for him against ZHAO. They pit him against ZHAO so early, showing how badly ZHAO treats him, bullies him, disrespects him, and finally, when Zuko beats ZHAO in the Agni Kai, it feels like a victory, which it really shouldn't yet. They give us mixed signals, giving us reasons to think there's more to Zuko without actually telling us those reasons. IROH says he's more honorable than ZHAO, and as the season unfolds, we see the truth of that. He becomes a little like an underdog. He has this task to accomplish against all odds, and yes, that task is unfortunately to capture Aang, but we see him differently. We sympathize with him. This is largely thanks to episodes like The Storm, where we learn about his abusive father and the reason Zuko was banished, and moments like in the Winter Solstice Part 1, where he picks Iroh over chasing the Avatar, which is one of those decisions that make us like him despite the fact that he's hunting down our protagonist. These are moments that humanize him, that show us that he's not soulless or heartless or evil for evil's sake. And then just before the finale, they force us to admit that we care about Zuko. By making us think he's been murdered, we're forced to confront how we feel about him. We're not cheering, we're scared for him, and we're happy when we find out he's alive. We want him to survive, and we want him to beat ZHAO. Zuko is a survivor, a fighter. It's shown over and over again in his relentless pursuit of Aang and his determination to beat ZHAO. The Blue Spirit shows us not just how far Zuko is willing to go to achieve his goals, but also how skilled he is as a warrior. He doesn't firebend at all when disguised as the Blue Spirit, which is very impressive. I also really enjoy seeing him work with Aang, because he does so well. He just goes along with everything Aang does, like, oh, we're flying now? Cool, let me just hit all the arrows flying at us while you do your thing, dude. Oh, we're walking on stilts now? I got you, let's go. He's the definition of resilience. As a side note, I also really appreciate the scenes he has with Iroh, where he's just acting like his nephew. Like in episode 7, when Iroh is soaking in the water, the way he whines and talks to Iroh, or when Iroh loses his lotus tile and Zuko just allows him to drag him around the market in search for a new one. It feels more like a teenager and his uncle than an angry prince. I'm just going to put this clip here because I think it sums up Iroh and Zuko's relationship brilliantly. I can't choose. I tried. I really, really tried. First, I said the Blue Spirit because of how it shows Zuko's physicality, strength, and skill, and intelligence. And that moment at the end when he lays there listening to Aang, I always like to think that he kind of sees where Aang is coming from. Like, he doesn't have anything against Aang personally. He doesn't want to capture Aang because he's the Fire Nation's greatest threat. He wants to capture Aang because he wants his father's love again. So I was going to say the Blue Spirit. But then there's other episodes like the 2-part finale where we see his endurance and he gives the speech about how he's always had to struggle and fight and that's made him strong. I love it. And him finally admitting he's tired in the end and listening to Iroh when he tells him to rest. I love the way it mirrors the pilot. Then I thought about The Storm, because I mean, come on, it's the best episode of the season. And in the end, I couldn't decide. So I'm going to say all 4, since the finale is a 2-parter. This fight is tense. From the moment it begins, we're on the edge of our seats. Zuko begins as the aggressor, but ZHAO has a smile on his face like he's just amused. And then they cut to Iroh, who looks tense, and I couldn't tell if this was going to be a fight where an arrogant teen gets his ass handed to him or a bully gets his ass handed to him. Then ZHAO becomes the aggressor, and I was like, oh man, here we go. But then Zuko's recovery is so cool. And Iroh's look of pride, even before the fight is over, tells you which way this is going to go. And finally, Zuko's decision not to burn ZHAO, even though not 5 seconds ago, ZHAO was ready to burn him. I don't know. It's one of the first hints that Zuko is a good person. So, yeah, it's one of my favorite. Iroh. Let's be real. I'm pretty sure that even people who've never watched this show know about Uncle Iroh. He's the one character loved by every Last Airbender fan, with not a single negative thing to be said about him. A character whose story, themes, and teachings are so tangible and life-changing that he wasn't just Zuko's mentor, he was ours too. So, what can I say about him that hasn't already been said ad nauseum? Well, the tricky thing about Iroh is that he doesn't actually get any character flaws or growth. All of his growth happens off-screen, before the show started. Or did it? I think over the course of the show, Iroh has learning moments of his own, but those come later. In Season 1, his character is very simple. He's almost a little bit like the quirky sidekick to Zuko's angsty, serious teenager. He's not after the Avatar, but Zuko is, and he's there for Zuko. This is very much Zuko's quest. Iroh is just along for the ride. He's happy to just hang out, drink tea, and play Pai Sho. and I want to talk about this for a minute. In the storm, we see that IROH is serving on Ozai's council. He's still a general, so this makes sense. But really think about this. He was off in Ba Sing Se, lost his son, went on a spiritual journey as he mourned the death of his only child, then returned home amidst the shame of his defeat at Ba Sing Se, and I'm sure Azula wasn't the only one who lost respect for him for retreating, so he probably had to deal with other generals and admirals judging him and all that, to find his father dead and younger brother sitting on the throne. But he doesn't get angry. He doesn't challenge the legitimacy of Ozai's claim to the throne. Instead, he humbly, and I say humbly because this is IROH post-spiritual journey, so I'm sure he did it with a lot of dignity and humility, agrees to serve his brother. Now, this is when he really starts to see how Ozai treats Zuko. He's lost his own son, so I'm sure this hit even harder for him. Ozai neglecting and mistreating Zuko probably hurt him so badly, and I'm sure they were close before, but now IROH really steps in, really tries to fill that father role for Zuko as best he can, for both their sakes. And it helps ease the pain of losing his son just a little bit, helps him get through the days a little easier. And then Ozai burns and banishes him. Another son about to be lost. He'd be left alone with his tyrannical brother and psychotic niece surrounded by war, and more war. There would be no light in his life. Now, I don't want to imply in any way, shape, or form that IROH left with Zuko for selfish reasons. He 100% did that so Zuko wouldn't be alone, so that he could be there for him even in exile. But once they had left, I don't think IROH was torn up about this at all. Being on a ship with his favorite person, the only person that he really has left, traveling the world was infinitely better than being stuck in that castle serving his younger brother, I'm sure. So when I say IROH was living his best life, I mean he was literally living his best life. I don't think he ever expected Zuko to find, let alone catch, the Avatar. So he was truly content to just sail the seas, playing Pai Sho and drinking tea, because it was the first real peace and the most happiness he had known in years. For most of this season, he's a hard man to take seriously. Unlike Zuko, we don't get an episode about IROH's past that gets us to sympathize with him. So why don't we hate him like we hate ZHAO? Why don't we feel threatened by him? Because while Zuko and ZHAO do awful things, IROH doesn't. He doesn't need redemption. We don't need any explanation for his evil acts because there are none. Apart from the second episode when he helped Zuko try to shoot Aang down, we never really see him actively engaging in trying to capture the Avatar. He finds joy in the small things, takes life easy. There are a few scattered scenes when we see him showing that there's more to him, where he sees Aang while he's in the Avatar state, for example, yet no one else can. When he's backed into a corner and forced to fight and turns out to be the baddest of them all. But that's all we get. Hints at a different IROH. For the rest of the time, he's a lovable, friendly, go-with-the-flow old man, supporting his nephew, mentoring and training him. And in the finale, he solidifies himself as a good guy when he threatens ZHAO and turns on the Firebenders to protect the Moon Spirit. His influence really starts in Season 2, I think, as well as his own growth. For Season 1, he's just this warm, trustworthy mentor figure. While Zuko may be an antagonist, ZHAO is definitely the villain. The nuance given to Zuko's character makes him sympathetic and even endearing, so that while we know he's the bad guy, we don't really hate him. Like I've already said, we even kind of root for him. And who do we root for him against? ZHAO. ZHAO is the villain we hate, the evil character with malicious intent. He is the real embodiment of the Fire Nation and the threat it poses, not just to Aang, but to the world. He's ruthless and power-hungry, and through the season continues to prove how dangerous he is. I'm glad that they included ZHAO as a contrast to Zuko. One, because it would be unrealistic for the Avatar to return and not have the Fire Nation on his back. Like ZHAO says, capturing the Avatar is too important to leave to a teenager. A teenager in charge of just one ship, no less. But also because it adds to the conflict. If we were just watching Zuko trying to capture Aang and Aang running away all season, it would be repetitive, and eventually Zuko would stop feeling like a threat. But with ZHAO interfering, the stakes are raised for both Aang and Zuko. Both of them have to constantly overcome this new obstacle, and it culminates in the very tense finale where both Aang and Zuko get their last showdown with ZHAO. He also offers a contrast to Zuko and IROH. They're also hunting the Avatar, yet they aren't ZHAO. We may not see them doing anything good, but they aren't like ZHAO. And to us, that means that they aren't as bad. They're not bad guys because ZHAO is a bad guy and they aren't like ZHAO. It's important for us to see them as separate from the Fire Nation in order for Zuko's arc to not just be effective but believable. And pitting him against ZHAO in season 1 was the first step. I know this seems crazy, but it was such a jaw-dropping moment for me that it has to be the best character moment for ZHAO. I mean, it was a horrible and completely evil thing to do, but Lord, if it was not epic. It shows just how corrupted by power ZHAO is, how proud he is. He can't have come all this way just to surrender, just to fail. He's fully committed to his evilness, and I respect it. Not all bad people can be reasoned with. He doesn't have the conscience that Zuko or Iroh has. He's a bad guy who came here to do bad things and nothing was going to stop him. It was consistent with his character, since that's how he's been all season, and I'm glad they made him stick to his guns. It's even more impressive when it comes after the threat that Iroh gives him, and the threatening way that Iroh is just standing there looking at him, ready to fight him, and he does it anyway. Man, you gotta give it to ZHAO. I love Suki, even though we don't dive too deep into her character, even in later seasons. She's sassy and sarcastic and doesn't hold back at all when humbling Sokka, which is exactly what he needed. She's strong, skilled, and brave, but I like the distinction they make about how her being those things and demanding respect does not mean that she then also can't just have a crush and want a boy's attention. She and Sokka have really good chemistry. Their banter is entertaining and they match each other's energy well. It's not hard to see why they like each other. Jet is probably one of the best side characters introduced in season 1. Not only is he an incredibly likable character, but his story is just heartbreaking. It's one thing to show us the destruction and suffering caused by the Fire Nation. It's another to show us the lasting, often radicalizing effect that destruction and suffering can cause. Jet is a lot like Sokka, a young boy left without parents, forced to figure out how to be a man and a leader all on his own. The fact that he's a leader of a resistance group is extraordinary. The life they've built for themselves, the treehouse and the organized attacks, it's really extraordinary, given how young he was when he lost his parents. So like Katara and Aang, we give him the benefit of the doubt. He's managed to survive in a town crawling with firebenders, and that means having to make tough decisions. This is war, after all. We might have still been on his side even after the incident with the old man, because while we may not like it, the man was Fire Nation, and in these times, you can't trust anyone. The moral complexity of his character makes him all the more fascinating, all the more memorable. He represents the reality of war. Remaining honorable, sticking to your morals in the middle of a war is hard. It's hard for anyone, but for a kid who grew up with no guidance, motivated by his anger, it's nearly impossible. Look at Zuko. The truth is that it's too easy to start off fighting on the right side, start off as a hero, then wake up one day to find you're the villain. June is great because she's such a real character. Not everyone is going to want to be a part of the war. She's from the Earth Kingdom, but she doesn't really have any allegiances. All she cares about is the money. She'll help whoever is paying her the most. An opportunist. She represents the people who use the war to their advantage. The people who don't really care about ending the war or helping people that are suffering around them, like the pirates. Right up until the end of the series, she just doesn't care. Sigh. I don't like the episode that these two are introduced, and I really cannot tell you why. But my feelings of the episode aside, they aren't bad characters. The Mechanist finds himself in a hard situation and makes the most of it. All he's trying to do is build a life for his son and his people, and some, like Aang, might think that the price to pay for this is too high. But who is Aang to judge? He has the ability to fight the Fire Nation, whereas this is a group of defenseless, powerless refugees. Making a deal with the Fire Nation is actually quite smart. So he's not only a genius, but he's resourceful and resilient. As for Teo, he's kind of like Aang, which is the airbending spirit I suppose they keep talking about in the episode. Living each moment to the fullest, being happy just because you're alive. He's a crippled kid who lost his mother, a refugee, but is full of life. He's a kid allowing himself to be a kid despite the bleak world they live in. And that's admirable. Can you imagine how shocking it was for Bumi to see Aang? Like, not only has it been 100 years since he last saw his friend, but Aang is still a kid. It must have been so shocking for him. Anyway, how can you not like Bumi? Personally, I'm a huge fan of his jokes, particularly the lettuce leaf one. I laughed when I was 9, and I still laugh now. He's a perfect don't judge the book by its cover example, presenting as a wacky old man, which honestly he just is, only to reveal that he's also the most powerful earthbender in the world. He's the first earthbender we get to meet, and man, he does not disappoint. The bending is cool, the dialogue is witty, he's just a lot of fun to watch. And then, when it's finally revealed that he's Aang's old childhood friend, I always just feel a little sad. I imagine Bumi thought his friend was dead and grieved him, and Aang probably never expected to meet anyone he used to know. So of course it's a sweet moment for both of them because of that. But I always find it sad. It's just a reminder that Aang has missed his entire life. He's lost everyone, not just the airbenders, but the people who knew him in the other nations as well. So I think a little bit that's what Bumi represents, the passage of time. I also want to point out that Bumi tells Aang to think out of the box, and the way he defeats the Fire Lord in the end is a completely out-of-the-box solution. Haru and his dad represent very interesting themes to me. They say that revolutions are started by the youth, and I think it's because the older people in society, in this case Haru's father, TYRO, and even his mother, had to be broken in order for the Fire Nation to take over. They fought and lost, and the memory of that loss keeps them afraid. KATARA asks what the Fire Nation can do that they haven't already done, and Haru's mother says they could take Haru away. She remembers the last time people tried to fight, and it resulted in her husband being taken, so she's afraid of it happening again. TYRO probably lost a few friends. He feels the pain of leaving his wife and young son alone. Fighting only makes it worse for them, so now he's cautious. But the youth, in this case Haru and KATARA, they don't have that fear. They've grown up under this oppression, and to them, freedom is worth the fight. Whereas TYRO feels the loss of his old life and fears things only getting worse, Haru and KATARA only see the oppression they're forced to live in and believe things can only get better. While Haru and TYRO are not particularly interesting characters, not as complex as, say, Jet, I like them because of what they represent. Haru's spirit is not broken, but he doesn't fight because of his mother's fear. And in turn, the youth give the elders courage. TYRO might not be willing to fight for himself, but he will fight to protect his son. Paco is definitely who Sokka would be if he never got humbled by Suki. But honestly, I think he's also just a jackass. He takes pleasure in humiliating people and likes being the big man in charge. His change of heart is absolutely one of the few things I dislike about the finale. He's such a traditionalist, such a jerk, and then he sees the necklace and just decides to teach KATARA. Why? Is it because she's the grandchild of the love of his life? Or because the pain of the memory of Kana leaving him makes him realize that traditions sometimes suck? Does he now think that women should be allowed to fight, or was KATARA just an exception? There's no real explanation for why he changes his mind, so I can't ever really say that I like him. And to think he's a member of the White Lotus. He doesn't seem to follow the teachings, since all the other White Lotus guys are pretty chill and open-minded and unbiased about anything. Do you think he's a member of the White Lotus here? Or does he join after he leaves the North Pole to go help rebuild the South? Let's talk about another grumpy old man who also happens to be a member of the White Lotus. Zhong Zhong. Zhong Zhong is exactly how I would expect a retired firebending general to be. Crabby and irritated. Honestly, he's what IROH should be. What's there to be happy about? He's so ashamed of who he is and his abilities, what he's done, and his entire nation that he ran away to live in the forest. He's not actively fighting in the war. He's not trying to stop the Fire Nation, though he obviously disagrees with them. He's just living in shame. That should be IROH, given the loss he faced at Ba Sing Se and his brother stealing the throne from him. He also doesn't necessarily support the war, but he's not fighting against it. Yet IROH manages to find joy in the small things. Tea and music night on the deck and Pai Sho. Zhong, on the other hand, sits and broods in isolation. Like June, he's honestly just a real character. Turning against your people isn't easy, even if you disagree with them. It's one thing to leave the fight and say you don't want to be a part of what they're doing, but it's another to go against them. It's also very hard to forgive yourself when you've done the kind of things that Zhong, as either a general or an admiral, must have done. He probably conducted seizures much like ZHAO at the North Pole or IROH at Ba Sing Se, and he's haunted by that. Getting over that and switching sides is not easy, so he sits and meditates in the forest and hopes for forgiveness in the afterlife. It's real, and I like it. Bato isn't really much of a character. Most of his significance is in what he represents for Sokka, just really nailing home the childhood that Sokka missed out on. I enjoy him though. He's kind of a glimpse into who Sokka was trying to be, and a reminder there is a lot going on in the world outside of our little trio. I really like the scene where he takes Sokka on the ice dodging initiation thing. Not that he really does anything particularly interesting, but just his presence allows Sokka to feel like he's earned something. Bato is not his dad, but he's the closest he can get to him for now, and that brings something new out of Sokka, this new kind of maturity. Well, there you go. Those are all the main and recurring side characters of Season 1. What do you think? Do you agree with my thoughts on each character? Do you think I could have chosen a better character moment for any of the characters? Did I forget any character who shows up in more than one episode? I'd love to hear who your favorite characters were. Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.